You can go ahead.
You are live.
You're live.
Good evening, and welcome to the consent decree forum. Tonight, we're going to talk about three areas that are going to be discussed tomorrow in the public hearing. The three areas that are going to be discussed tonight, I think, are extremely important. One is interactions with youth. Another is behavior, folks in behavioral crisis, and the third would be misconduct and discipline. These are all three big areas, and the reason why I say they're important, the two areas that I mentioned, interactions with youth and the behavioral crisis, really involve a number of interactions between the police department and, of course, members of the public body. The misconduct and discipline area is designed to make sure that if a police officer doesn't obey the rules that are in those two areas and the other areas of the consent decree, that hopefully there will be an appropriate amount of accountability. So, without any further ado, and to make sure that you hear from the experts that are here today to discuss each area, let me start with you and your behavioral health.
Well, I appreciate it. I'm going to cover a few things that I thought would be important for this meeting. And actually, I think that the fairly good news is what I'm talking about. In the behavioral health area, we started from a position where we really needed to take a look at the policies and the training itself. And we've had good success with the policies and the training in developing ones that I think a number of experts and people with lived experience really have gotten behind and I think are very valuable. But what I was more impressed with was that we've done an analysis of the body-worn camera footage that from a randomly selected group of events that involved individuals with drug abuse or substance abuse issues. And what was really exciting about that was to see the change. I was fortunate enough to ride approximately 10 to 12 times. Oh, I'm sorry, I thought that was done earlier, my apologies. Okay, I'm Randolph DuPont. I'm a clinical psychologist. I'm also a professor at the University of Memphis, and I'm responsible for behavioral health aspects that involve the consent decree. Anything else you want me to add for? Oh, okay, all right. Let me swing back then. What I wanted to focus on then was the fact that we not only have done the paperwork, that is the policy work, we've not only done the training of officers and significant training. Baltimore police officers now have more training in mental health than probably most any department in this country. They've done more than other consent decrees have done. The number of the hours of training are overwhelming. If you started with the consent decree and you're at this point now, if you go through all the training that was available, you'll end up with something on the order of about 65 hours of training in mental health, which I think is very impressive. But what I think is more impressive is that we took randomly selected a significant sample of videos, of officers' videos themselves, if they're having to turn on their body-worn camera footage and indicate what's going on. And a number of people that some of whom are at this table, Ken included, myself included, when we took a look at those, what was impressive to us was the kind of changes between what we had seen when those of us rode with the police and what we're seeing now. And one of the things that I have concern about, and what I think is important for this forum, is how do you take that kind of change and make a difference in the way people see the police? How do you change the way that people have had negative experiences sometimes that were maybe 5-10 years ago or longer? And how do you make a difference in the fact that now what we're seeing is much more positive? So it's a very big challenge, I think, that our team faces, and that we're hoping to accomplish in part by having these forums and talking about what's happening. Let me go through a couple of quick issues around behavioral health. In addition to looking at how officers themselves are responding to individuals who are having substance abuse or behavioral health events, what we also wanted to do was we wanted to take a different look as well. And what we wanted to look at was, does the public know that there's an enormous change occurring in the mental health and substance abuse system in this city? And that basically what's happened now is that services that weren't there before are now becoming available in a way that's very impressive. They've gone from having 3 or 4 mental health mobile teams that are available for the community to call on to having something in the order of 11 to 15. It's a big change that's occurring. They've gone from not being able to connect people up with treatment even after a crisis to where they have now computerized systems that can reach out to the scheduling of various well-respected institutions and connect them up from a crisis event and have them followed up. And it's very impressive. The state has spent $40 million on developing that particular system. And the state contributed that money as part of what they were doing. Now, the other part that's incredibly good news is that not only has there been funding to improve crisis lines so you don't have to call the police through 911, you can call 988 and get direct contact with a social work team, and they will come out. And we've been able to look at their statistics on how well how they're doing. And they're coming out often, most often, within an hour of the call, which is pretty impressive when you look at the national average, which in the past has been about 2 to 3 hours as a standard. But more than that, they're also taking that data and looking at where are they not serving well enough that they're getting that kind of response. So it's an impressive thing. And that kind of funding is not only significant, but they've turned that into a funding that's ongoing. That is that your phone bill and your 988 bill, which comes from a small fee of 25 cents a person, will actually fund these efforts through the state, and they will not be lost because of the kind of budget crises that are going on in Maryland. So that's the second thing I'm excited about, is that there's starting to be a change in the way that there's a response to crisis events here, not only from the police, but from the mental health and substance abuse system and from the city itself. The third thing I want to bring up, and I think it's very important as well, is that I think that because of the consent decree, there's been a motivation on the part of those agencies that provide mental health and substance abuse to try to look at where are the failings. They're now having meetings on a regular basis and examining high-profile events that maybe people were struggling on, and they're bringing it to the attention of this steering group that has both people who are, those of you who may not be familiar, the term lived experience simply means individuals who've experienced mental illness in their family or with themselves, okay? So those individuals are part of this effort, as well as experts from all over the place, from other universities and from the city itself and from the major mental health agencies that provide services in the city. They are getting together, they're looking at these cases, and they're analyzing them to say, where do we have shortcomings? And that is impressive to me. That's going to move into a much bigger analysis. So there is, on the level of the police, there's a change occurring that we can document. On the level of the individuals who can call from the community, we've got good data to show that the calls to these mobile crisis teams and mental health agencies have gone up dramatically, whereas the need for the police to intervene is going down. And that's what people want. They want to have both professionals and peer counselors available to show up in a short time, just as we have the police. They're impressive with their turnaround times from 911, but now we're finding that with 988, and what we're finding is that 911, when they hear an individual call from the community, they're not just sending the police out automatically. Instead, they're talking to the mental health professionals at 988 and saying, maybe you can handle this call. Maybe we don't need police. There's no safety issue in this community. There's no threat of violence. Why not send someone from a mental health background? And that's what's happening. The data is impressive. If you look at the scale of mental health calls to 988, they're going like this. There's 50,000 when they used to be around 20,000. If you look at the calls to 911 that are classified as mental health calls, they're going way down. And that should change, I think, is a very important change. And finally, another part of the system change that I'm excited about is that there's always been a struggle with homelessness for a long time in Baltimore. Right? The city's made a commitment to do something about it. Has come upon some $100 million for these funds to make these things work. But we've got strong evidence that those individuals that are being reached are not just the individuals who are the easiest to reach, but those individuals with substance abuse and mental health problems, addiction problems, are being reached by those same services. And we have evidence that from 21 and 22 to 24, there's been a fairly impressive increase in those individuals, and that many of those individuals have found permanent housing. And we're talking about shelters. That number's running about 5,000 in the course of that time period. But the number of individuals that are actually getting permanent housing has gone from like in the 70s to somewhere in the 200 or 300 range. Now that's a good start. And I just think I want to emphasize that what we're seeing is concrete results that we're pretty excited about, but the challenge that we face is, how does that get to the community in a way that the community can believe in it and really understand that this is not just a paper change, this is not just some numbers that a statistician came up with, this is really affecting people on a personal level. So that's kind of what I wanted to say.
Any questions? And we're gonna do this, we'll have questions now, because I'm like, if you're like me, which you have heard most recent about, you will remember. So we'll do it now, and at the end of the session, when everybody has presented, we'll get a chance to ask questions again. So
Questions now?
yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am. No, she was first.
Me? Yeah, okay. So how long has 988 been in effect?
It really came into effect somewhere in the middle of 2022. Y'all had a crisis line before that was actually fairly professional, all right? But it was not funded as part of this national 988 effort, so you had to call a separate number. It didn't have quite the resources to send out. So what happened that was nice in Baltimore was, as the consent decree was bringing a big change in the number and capacity to respond, 988 comes along, and now the front end of identifying and reaching people is happening. So it's been started up around 2022. They did a big advertising campaign around 2022 to the end of 2022. They recently have got major funding. They have a coalition of over 200 providers from the Baltimore area, and that basically, that's really why they didn't. The fear was, with the funding problems that's facing Baltimore, we would have not seen that happen. But I'll tell you another piece of good news for you all. This city made a decision not to be part of the drug misuse and drug pharmacy misuse of certain drugs. And so there was a national settlement, but Baltimore decided to go their own route. Baltimore had recently received major funding, $500 million. The mayor has started a group to identify where are the needs. And some of those needs are clearly involved in the things that cross over to where the consent decree is. How can we have a place that an individual like yourself might see a person that has homelessness, and it's not looking good, it's getting cold. You'll be able to call a number, and they'll give you a homelessness expert on the phone when you call that will be able to get you a referral and say to you, here's where you need to bring that person right now. That's the kind of thing that is going to happen as a result of this impressive settlement that the city of Baltimore reached with some of the drug companies.
Randy, you've been around a number of years, and you have served in the capacity on many different consent decrees. How does Baltimore's approach to this compare to the other cities that you've been in?
Over the years, there's been a progression in consent decrees. If you look from one city to the next, and I have been involved in about 4 or 5 consent decrees, 2 in the same role with the team, others with sometimes on the police department, sometimes with the cities. But what I've seen is a dramatic change in Baltimore's consent decree was brought that to a real clear vision of the consent decree itself. It said the problem isn't just about the police. That is a problem. We need to do something about that. But the consent decree also said the problem is the system doesn't support what good people are trying to do to help people. And if we can't get the system to respond, being the mental health system, the substance abuse system, the healthcare system, if they're not going to respond, you're not going to reinforce the police doing the right thing. So it's been a dramatic change. It's a higher standard than any other consent decree has ever had to reach. It is much more complicated and much more new ground, but I think it's an incredible difference, and I think it's resulted in a better consent decree than any of the other cities have had to, any of the standards they've had to meet, and it's accomplished more.
Yes, sir, you had questions.
Several questions. 988 doesn't seem to be on this newsletter. So.
Yeah, this is the first time I've ever
Yeah,
heard
we'll
this.
need to get that more front and center if we can, because it is a great thing, and I know they're doing campaigns citywide, putting things on the buses and other places, reaching out. It is an important thing to
So
people.
we'll get it on the next
My
newsletter, right?
apologies for not bringing something to the newsletter, but I think we should.
Uh-huh.
I think that's right.
Now, you mentioned funding. Is this funding like Medicare and all being cut by the current administration?
The good thing about this funding is it's not dependent on that. Now, where there is an involvement, okay, Medicaid is the issue there. They've recently been able to improve the funding for places like Medicare and Medicaid. Now, there is, we've got to wait and see, and where does that matter? 988 funding is stable. Mobile crisis team funding is reasonably stable, except that when those teams go out and they provide a service, often through Medicaid or Medicare, that their billing occurs. So the answer is, it's very important that that funding remains stable, or we could have problems down the road. So far, that's not been something that's been subject to some of what you read in newspapers about the changes that have occurred. I'm hopeful that that will not be seen that way because it's doing an awful lot of good. But the answer is, it will not, I think it won't diminish what we're doing with the police, it won't diminish what's going on with the mobile team and getting the social workers out there. It might mean that long-term funding for expanding and continuing the crisis team services up, that would be some, there might be some risk there. But to be honest with you, the city has been able to find a lot of different sources of funding besides the use of Medicare and Medicaid funds. That's probably a pretty small percentage of what's going on.
One more question, and remember, we can always have questions at the end. So anyone on this subject? Okay,
Thank you.
Hassan? Well, I'm sorry, no, let me do this. Let me have Taz to talk a little bit about interactions with youth, and then I'll have you.
I'll come back later.
Yeah. He's the cleanup guy. He's Mr. Fix-It.
He's a cleanup guy.
Go ahead,
To
Taz.
introduce myself, my name is Roberto Villaseñor, but everyone calls me Cass. I got up at 2:30 this morning and flew all the way out to this meeting. So hopefully I don't say anything really confusing to you all, but I'm a little tired. But I retired after 35 years with Tucson Police Department. I was chief of police in that department there, and I started with two others, 21 CP Solutions, and we are part of the members of the Baltimore monitoring team. And my areas of where I'm the subject matter expert are use of force, transport of prisoners, youth, and school police. So youth, I don't think anyone would argue the fact that police and youth have always been a flashpoint. You know, you have kids that are growing up, and excuse me if I use the term kids, 66 years old, everyone's a kid almost now. No, sir, not you. You're my elder and I respect you. Young members of our community often have a struggle with authority. And then police usually have a struggle with anyone who doesn't accept authority. So you have two things here that just bash at heads all the time. And so what I'm really pleased to see here is that Baltimore has really taken steps to try and improve how police interact with youth and to try and train the officers here on how youth development occurs. A lot of studies, I'm sure you all are familiar with this, in the past few years, studies show that the human brain doesn't mature until about 25 or 26 years old. And so you have 21 to 22-year-olds that maybe are not mature psychologically, dealing with 21 and 22-year-old cops that aren't mature psychologically. It's a Tinder match ready to explode there. So we needed to provide some training and some policies to set guidelines of how we want police officers to interact with you and how they need to take the brunt of, okay, we're the ones that are going to be there to help, so we have to treat you in a certain way that they will respond to. So we did a lot of training with it. We didn't do this on our own, and we didn't, we brought in subject matter experts, people that work with youth in the community, people that's their job, that's what they do. They do these studies and they work on it. Randy was involved with some of that from the beginning as well, because obviously there's oftentimes behavioral health issues in our young population. And so training was developed to help teach officers appropriate interaction methods with youth, to get youth to listen to them, to listen to what the youth are saying to them as well, and to not just be a one-way street. When we first started this, the Department of Justice investigation showed there were a lot of problems with interaction with police and youth, and that was part of the issue that came up with several paragraphs addressing that. There were two policies that were designed to address that. One was policy 1202, which interacted with youth in policy. That's where we talk about the development stages of youth, how to get a young person to best respond to you sometimes, letting them vent, letting them scream, whatever, as long as they're not being violent, it gets it out, and then you can get past that and get out to a conversation where it's a little bit meaningful. 1207 was the next policy that dealt primarily with how to interrogate the youth. We when you have someone in custody or doing an investigation, what's your best way of getting information to them about what the situation they're involved in and what they're involved with so they can get to you. So this training was conducted and completed in 2023. So we never put any policies into effect, even though we designed policies in 21, 22 with the help of community groups. Until every officer is trained on the policy is not put live in effect. But that occurred in, I believe it's November of 2023. In October 2024, we did our first assessment. How is that going? And this talks about, we look at interacting with youth, we look at the body worn camera, we judge it, and we come out with grades on are they appropriately interacting with youth, are they using techniques and tactics that we talked about, are they using other resources that are available to them. We're very pleased that about 75% of contacts show that they were compliant with the policy. There were still some issues that we needed to work on. A couple of them being getting the supervisors on board so they know how to direct their officers to deal with youth, and getting them to buy into the system as well. Also, better gathering of data about the youth stops and the youth contacts. That's something that Baltimore has really struggled with throughout all of their issues and stuff, because it's just, when we first got here, it was amazing to me. Baltimore was a city that used a system of paper reports still. And here we were, one of the largest police departments in the country, yet it was still way behind a lot of agencies on how to gather data. It is amazing the progress that has been made in that area here in Baltimore. They now have Axon records, it's automated. They didn't have computers and cars when they first came out here in 2017. They just weren't there, and that was unheard of for a city the size of the agency this large. They now have computers in all the cars, they have interaction through Axon records, they have a CAD system, they have body worn cameras now. There's been quite an improvement in technology to get Baltimore up to speed. Along with that has come the ability to gather more information, to gather better information to what we need. And where we're going to be seeing some of that now is we have the consent decree divided into different topics along the line. One that we're just starting the assessment on right now is stop, searches, and arrests. There's going to be a segment of that on stops of youth to then also judge, are they acting the youth-specific policies, the interaction policies, how are they talking with the youth? All these things we're going to be judging on there. So my hope is that, and actually my expectation from what I've seen, is that we will get them into full compliance, hopefully before the next assessment that's going to take place in 2026. When we looked at what fell short in 2024's assessment, we developed with them a crosswalk, we call it. We have a crosswalk here. Find the areas that were a little bit behind on progress, what the remedial efforts are going to be to address those issues, and where we're at and who's responsible for doing that. So we're following that crosswalk, working with DOJ and Baltimore Police Department to make sure that they're coming up to standards in all of those areas that we have there. One other element that we really emphasize is diversion to arrest. You know, arresting a juvenile for something very minor and getting them into the juvenile justice system sometimes is the worst thing you can do for them. There's some youth that really need that type of attention, but most of them, I'd say 80 to 90% don't. And so trying to get some type of diversion efforts out there so that officers have something else to do with you besides just arresting them or taking them to juvenile. And so we've developed different techniques that officers can use. They call them paper referral, they call them just referring to the parents. We also have a program that was started by the mayor's office called Sidestep. It didn't go over really well, but BPD has stepped in now to monitor that and say, we're gonna really emphasize this and push this out citywide. It started out in just one division, but we're gonna push it out citywide and make sure this is one of the areas we want supervisors to be aware of, so they know to direct their officers to use these type of resources. So we're gonna put a lot of attention on diversion to arrest, making sure that we're trying to get the youth into a different type of path so we can help to remediate that. Also, we work with Baltimore School Police. That was also part of the consent decree, because Baltimore schools have their own police department. There you go. And so we wanna make sure that when there's concurrent investigation, where both jurisdictions may be involved, that they're working together and that whatever Baltimore School Police is doing isn't contrary to what we do as Baltimore Police Department, what Baltimore Police Department does on their policies to make sure they're in line. They reviewed their initial memo of understanding that they have with the Baltimore School Police, made sure everything was in line with that, and what the consent decree requires that every year they review that, and they make biannually recommendations for improvement. They have kept in line with that, and in fact, I believe in January of 2025, a motion was presented to the court to say that Baltimore Police Department has gotten into full and sustained compliance with that portion of the consent decree, and they're now in their sustainment period, which goes for 1 year and will be done in January of 2026. So if they keep things going the way they are, that would be another element that could possibly be taken off of the consent decree. We don't want to be here forever. We want to help the department to get to the point where they can monitor themselves, do things the right way, and get out from under the consent decree. But this is an area where I'm very pleased with the efforts that have gone forward. I think that BPD is, again, just like Randy said, we're probably showing BPD as one of the better agencies in the country on the tactics and methods of dealing with youth. We can get better. Every agency can always get better. But I think that they're at least taking the right tack because they're looking at all the things that cops never looked at before when dealing with youth. They just usually just arrest them, take them to juvenile, or take them home, and didn't really try to give them any assistance. Baltimore police are actively trying to do that. Any questions for me? Yes, sir.
Why did the police chase Freddie Gray? He wasn't doing anything illegal or wrong. Are the police like dogs? They chase anything that moves?
Actually, no. And in fact, one of the things that we have dealt with at Stop, Search, and Arrest, and one of the tactics and policies that we have put in place is say, just running from police by itself is not a reason to apprehend someone. There has to be other reasonable, articulable suspicion that criminal activity occurred and the individual that you may be chasing was involved in that activity. The fact that someone just runs from police is not a crime, and it's not a basis for a stop. And in fact, that's one of the things that we look at in our evaluation of stop searches and arrests. So, no.
Thank you. Is the Fraternal Order of Police okay with everything you're saying here today?
To be honest, I don't really care.
Can we get a written statement from the FOP that they are okay with everything you're saying?
You can ask them. Let me follow up on your question. And it's a good time to talk about it. Freddie Gray was about 10 years from now. 10 years ago, I should say. And of course, one of the primary reasons why we have a consent decree in Baltimore City is because of the problems that the police were engaged in when they accosted Freddie Gray. I mean, it goes everywhere from, as Taz just said, some of the stop, search, and arrest stuff, but also with respect to the transport of people who are in custody. And one of the areas that the department has done a really, really good job of is they bought new vans, they've got cameras in the back and front and the side, they know how to do the compartments, they now restrain people. I mean, they've done everything that they need to do to make sure that you don't have another Freddie Gray unless some police officer intentionally wants to hurt him or someone like him. So, you know, as unfortunate as Freddie Gray was, what came out of the Freddie Gray uprising is really the consent decree.
Yeah, that's cool. If somebody's having a behavioral problem and you call 988, how long does it take them to get there? And what does the police do what they did to Freddie Gray until they get there? Like put their knee on their back and are the police still hurting people to detain them?
Well, what we like now is that we got systems working together. Okay, if there's an immediate safety crisis and the police show up, we have also done training with them, and our look at their videotapes tell us that they're doing the right thing. Their goal is to de-escalate that situation. Their goal is not to use force, and we're monitoring use of force, we're monitoring the level of use of force, and all of those things in a very intense and careful way. So I would honestly say to you that what we've got is two systems working together. It's not like that, if the police are there and then the 988 is gonna show up, that would be great, but we're not ignoring what happens when the police are there, and the results are, to be honest with you, very impressive. And why do we know? Because they have to film it, and we're watching all the films. And that's the bottom line. And I'm impressed with the change. But more than that, I'm impressed with the change in the attitude of the officers. It's not, you've got to be thinking on your feet when you're a police officer. You can't just be relying on something you might remember from 2 years ago. You've got to apply something with intelligence and sensitivity, and that's what we're seeing. And so I think the answer is it's going well, and it's not going to be ignored. Wait for 98, but rather good things will happen on the front end.
Thank you. Thanks for
Yes, sir.
coming all the way
So,
from Memphis, by the way.
My next question, excuse me, sir, I apologize. You had some great questions, I just wanted to ask them. Thank you.
I just wanted to thank you for coming from all the way from Memphis.
I didn't know you knew that, but thank you for, I appreciate that.
Thank you.
All right, so yes,
All right, so my question was, we've seen a stark decrease in murder, specifically in Baltimore City. I know some of that has to do with what's been happening with the consent decree. I do work all around, especially in community. What role do you think that credible messengers have played in the reduction of crime? And was that a part of the consent decree for them to work with credible messengers like Peace Team and things like that? For those who don't know, returning citizens that work in community and provide resources and things like that, because I know you did mention resources. So what role have they played, and do police intentionally, not like work with them, because they have a different role, but what role do you think they played in that?
Yeah.
Let me quickly go to the Behavioral Health part, because others are involved with this as well. The youth group
Yes,
also has brought in a number of credible messengers that actually did films and all that were used in the training. So I'm gonna let come back to Taz in a minute. But basically, one of the things that I liked about what happened here was we did a community-based committee that included individuals who've been through it, done it, and helped those that are trying to get better. So what you're calling credible.
You give him the name of the group.
Yeah.
It
It used
used to be
to be called, it used to be called CPIC, which was an advisory committee.
Okay.
It's now called the Baltimore Coalition on Behavioral Health.
Okay.
And so BCBHC is the new name.
Yep.
And everybody is still welcome. We still have monthly meetings. We have anywhere from 40 to 60 people show up at the monthly meeting. We have ongoing committees. And what I want to emphasize about that is that not only we've done that, but we've had individuals volunteer, not just from the Johns Hopkins and the University of Maryland. We have those individuals volunteer, but we also have individuals with lived experience that are actually running some of these programs that are working in the community, teach the officers. So the ongoing training that we have involves people from the community coming in, and they're being well received. All the ratings we're getting say that the officers, you can see it on the officer's face, that when they see somebody that's been there and done it, it makes a difference to them, and it changes their attitude as they move through the streets. So I think that there's been a good result. But I don't want to ignore the fact, Taz, you know what happened with youth as well.
I think, well, yes, absolutely. We've involved community groups from the beginning to design not only the policies, but the training. And they took an active part in the training, like you said, helping develop videos using youth from the community.
Yep.
Talking with youth, getting them to just interview them and letting the cops listen to what the kids were saying, why they got upset, what the cop did that upset them. And I sat in on the training when it was actually given to the officers. And human nature, you're gonna get some resistance, but then actually I was really pleased and surprised that it started a lot of good conversations. And then the cop said, my teenage son or my teenage daughter said the exact same thing. And we're talking about, and it got some really good conversations going with that. And on a broader scope, in answer to your question, particularly in crime numbers, I think any successful effort in reduction of crime has got to involve community members and involvement. If cops telling you something that this is what's going on is not going to go over as well as a community member themselves coming out and saying, yeah, this is what we're doing, this is what's making an impact, and this is what you all need to do to help get things better. So any successful effort on reducing crime has to involve it.
I appreciate it. I asked that question from a different standpoint, because actually one of the groups that I actually work with produced one of those videos with you. So the one that No Boundaries did, actually my group did it. So I wanted to know that it was impactful, and to hear that, literally have made my day. I appreciate it.
I sat in several of those classes in the back room, watching the cops and listening to them, and I was pleasantly surprised.
I love that it had a positive impact. Thank you.
That's my nephew.
I appreciate it.
And I wanted to mention, we have our newest delegate, our newest state delegate, Sean Stinnett, is here with us tonight.
Yeah,
Congratulations.
and I'm a chosen nephew of hers as well. Thank you.
The only thing I'll add is one of the areas that, as a formal matter, the city just became in compliance with was something that actually happened at the beginning of the consent decree. It was called the Community Oversight Task Force. That was a part of the consent decree that was really to kick things off. The city was required to convene a task force of community members to make recommendations to the city on how to improve oversight of the police department. That's not exactly what you're talking about, which is different, but there's certainly community engagement aspects to it, and that was another area, not exactly a credible messenger issue, but one in which certainly those voices were taken into consideration.
Let me follow up real quick and go directly to one of the questions you asked, and that had to do with police crime and reduction of crime and the consent decree. There are a lot of different reasons why crime, and in particular violent crime, has been reduced over the last 3 years, and right now it looks like it's going to be for a fourth year. It's going to be even better than it was last year. From the perspective of the consent decree, this is my view. I think that police officers now are so much better trained that they are able to not only solve crimes, but they're able to get more information from the community, and they do that through a variety of different ways. And one of the ways that I look at it, and again, I'm not an academic, I'm not sitting there writing this book, but I look at different factors that play into why people trust or distrust folks. And one of the areas I look at is use of force. You know, when you're getting your butt whipped and your head kicked in, 10 times a day, and you're seeing it on TV, even the good cop, nobody's going to pay any attention to him or her. I'm looking at the data, and I'm not talking about what people said happened 10 years ago or 15 years ago. I'm looking at the data now. And I can tell you that we looked at data in 2023, and we compared it to use of force in 2017 when we first came on board. There is a 60% decrease in use of force cases between 2023 and 2017. There is I think 40% decrease between use of force in 2023 and 2018. So we're seeing an incredible reduction in use of force. And of course, that's important, but to me, what's even more important, there's a significant reduction in what you really should be looking at, and that is excessive use of force cases. That has dropped. So I think even though it's hard to get the community to, because the community is upset. They've been involved. I've been in Baltimore City 70 years, man. I know what happened in the 50s and 60s and 70s and 80s. It's going to take a long time before people say, okay, the department is much better. People have bad feelings about what happened 10 years ago. But what I look at is, while I care about what they say, I look more at the data. When I'm looking at data that's showing me that there is significant reductions in these areas that I think really are responsible for the distrust, and I see those numbers going, getting better and better and better. I think this department's on the right track. So I do think there's a correlation between the consent decree and the way police officers are trained and the way they're showing their training on the street.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Appreciate it. Two questions. One, if we can go back to information sharing, and particularly with our school system. I personally am very proud at the fact that we don't find these cases to the extent that we do in the community within our schools with excessive use of force. However, I think that your time here has provided the opportunity to establish some best practices in Baltimore. And I think that some of those best practices, which have to do with the way we police and the way we find funding to fill our gaps, is there any process currently happening? Is there any planning to be able to collaborate with Baltimore School Police to be able to do the same. Because where you found some of those gaps, particularly in technology gaps, those gaps still exist in other places of policing within our city. One is city schools, but there are others. Can you speak towards information sharing with other departments, including Baltimore City Schools?
In a limited fashion, I can. I do believe that Baltimore School Police just also got on the Axon record system just recently. That is going to improve capabilities of sharing information vastly, because now they have the same platform. The hope is that they'll be able to share that information readily across that. Now, there's work that has to be done in the technological area that is way above my head before I think that's going to happen. But I do know that that is a thought that others have talked about as well, because there's such interaction between the two agencies, and that's what we're talking about. When we have that interaction, we want to make sure everyone's playing off the same sheet of music. And so by having them on the same records management system, that's a great first step in getting that to accomplish. So I do know that as this goes forward, and what they're going to continue to do is looking at the memo of understanding, memo of understanding each time. See, that's that 2:30 in the morning thing coming up.
You got it right.
I came from Arizona.
You got it.
No, you came farther than Memphis. That is going to be something they're going to look at every year to say, okay, how do we improve? Are there things that we can suggest, Baltimore can suggest to Baltimore School Police on how to do? Is there things that Baltimore School Police can say, hey, this doesn't work for us, what you guys are doing here, and there's got to be that collaboration so they can bring that forward into any updated memo of understanding each time they produce one.
Let me do this. Let me turn to Hassan, talk a little bit about misconduct. This big area, because you can have all the training and all the policies in the world, but people, you got 2,000 police. You know, reality means that some people are gonna make mistakes and some people just gonna be just downright nasty. So there has to be an accountability system, and that's what Hassan will talk about.
Good evening, everyone. My name's Hassan Ayton. I'm a retired chief of police, served 30 years, 2 cities. Kind of sounds like a prison sentence, but 30 years, 2 cities. And I've been working on consent decrees for over 10 years. I was the head monitor in Cleveland's consent decree, deputy monitor in Seattle, deputy monitor in Chicago, and I'm currently one of the deputy monitors here. I also work in Minneapolis, but I'm working for Minneapolis, helping them to get better. I have to say that the Baltimore consent decree and the progress that I've seen here, it's been said tonight, is while we're not done, and there's still a lot of work to do, is pretty spectacular when it comes to a turnaround in a major city police department that came from such a bad place. With that, I'll take us back to 2017. We talked about police misconduct and discipline. Back when we first started here, PIB, the Public Integrity Bureau, did not exist. There was the OPR, and when we started looking at internal affairs, it was Office of Professional Responsibility. And I remember this distinctly. We did sort of a baseline assessment. We looked at 150 cases, and they were, they were horrible. Very poor investigations. They took years to complete, and they were still not effective in getting to the truth of what happened. That was one of the issues. Another issue back then was there were roadblocks throughout the whole system in BPD. If someone walked into a place, a BPD, one of the district stations, to make a complaint, it was highly likely they were never going to make that complaint. There were roadblocks along the way, talking about, well, I'll take your number, I'll call you back. They never got callbacks. The system was broken. Generally, in consent decrees, you start to build on the existing system and try to repair it with the consent decree. Here, we started over. We started with an entirely different system, and that's where PIB came out. OPR back in 2017, I'm gonna talk about staffing because staffing is critical in a couple of different ways. Had 17 investigators, 17 to handle all of BPD. Those investigators, it seemed to us, were assigned there not for the right reasons, let's say. People were sort of cast aside and sent into one of the most critical areas of operation of any police department, internal affairs. You want your best, your brightest, your most respected people, your highly skilled investigators, your people that can find whatever the truth is, that can find it, not people you're trying to cast aside. So there were just fundamental problems, but let's think of that number 17. They were dealing with hundreds of cases each. So let's say that someone was well-intentioned. I'm in internal affairs, and I spent 10 years during my career in internal affairs. My caseload was usually around 25. Some of these folks were carrying caseloads that were 70 plus. They had no chance of doing a good investigation. So that's where staffing becomes important. Training. They had no training. They were sent there, given cases to work, and that was that. So Baltimore was basically hoping for the best, but wasn't getting the best. So let's fast forward. We come in, consent decree, we get a couple of new commissioners in, and a couple of years later, Baltimore starts to really rebuild that structure. Today, we have 38 investigators, and we're not done. The number we are trying to hit and trying to get BPD to hit is 50 investigators. And they have a whole supervisory structure on top of that and command structure on top of that. And they're getting close. Now BPD, their recruitment section, we just heard from them the other day, they are starting to get hundreds of applications. Like their academies are really building up. They're getting applicants in. So we want those applicants to come in, to get trained, but then we also want transfers of experienced investigators as those folks get out on the street on their own to come into PIP. It's important for the reasons that I said that they were failing back in 2017 and 2018. The caseloads now are much lower. There's much higher scrutiny in terms of the case quality, and it goes through an actual, and we monitor this, it goes through an actual chain of command review. So if you put your name on it, you're accountable for what you just signed as a sergeant, as a lieutenant, as a captain, and then ultimately as the chief of PIB. Sorry, I'm gonna look at some of my notes. Training's been completely revamped. It is high quality and frequent. Back in November, everyone in PIB was retrained. There was annual training, but this training went right along with emerging practices, best practices, things that effective police departments are doing. And we're starting to see it in the work. Earlier I said, we're not there yet. We did a huge, a comprehensive assessment of hundreds of cases in 2024. And we also did a crosswalk of those cases. When the report came out, we looked at where the gaps were and where they were not performing. And there were a lot of areas, but there were specifically areas around administrative tasks. So they're a little separate from the actual investigation, but the administrative tasks, the controls, the quality controls, and things that they had to do when they worked with other agencies. We've highlighted all those areas, and we just got the crosswalk back from the parties, DOJ and BPD and the city. And we're drafting the methodology for the next assessment, which hopefully will be completed in late fall, November of 2025.
Go ahead, I finished. I just wanted to ask him. Go ahead, finish.
I'll finish because I know I'm conscious of the time. And this is actually the last piece that I'm going to talk about. This assessment, we are giving them time to shore up all of the areas that were identified, and then we're going to laser focus on those and some of the larger other areas. So hopefully we'll have a report out in early 2026. But my sense right now PIB is that everybody's rowing in the right direction. They are able to investigate, they're able to come to the right findings in their investigations, and they're handing out a lot of discipline. The turnover has been pretty stark, and usually that's a really good sign that things are changing in an organization. We started seeing the turnover in officers a few years ago, where a lot going out under investigation and terminated, and a lot of new ones coming in. Now it's starting to totally rebalance. So I'm very optimistic about that. And we are also monitoring complaint intake testing, where folks are making complaints and making sure that those complaints actually get accepted and get assigned. So that's underway. It's different from other ethics testing. This is very much just looking at the complaint getting taken in. And I'll stop there as it's 6:51. I'll take the question.
Yeah, I guess it's a couple of questions, but when is the next review for the courts? One.
Tomorrow.
Oh, man. So does that mean you guys are ready? So the other question becomes, when you all make the presentation, right, do you feel like the judge is going to say, we're going to continue this process, or are we going to rescind the consent decree because everything has kind of been put on the right track and we don't need this anymore?
No. Ken, you want me to take it?
Go ahead.
No, there's a formal process. When all of the areas come into compliance, full and effective compliance, then there is a period of time, in some cases, in some areas it's 1 year, other areas it's 2 years, where we're still here and we're very active, but we're watching BPD and the city critically self-assess themselves. But we're there watching. The court will not release until they're ready to be released.
So that might be another 10 years from now.
No,
We're hoping not.
let me help you a little bit. Let me dig a little bit down into the weeds. I don't want to go too far because I know you want to.
No, it's okay. I'm
But look, there are 17 areas in the decree, depending on how you count it. We count 17. Each area is its own section. It's got its own set of requirements. Misconduct and discipline is the biggest section in the entire decree. I don't know how many paragraphs. 38 paragraphs, but it's huge. Then you have some that have maybe 1 or 2 paragraphs. So the way we do this, we've been doing these assessments now for about 3 or 4 years. We let the parties, which is DOJ, the city, and BPD, essentially tell us when they think they're ready to be evaluated. You know, we just don't go in and just say we're going to evaluate this area because we're not going to waste people's time and money. These assessments take a lot of time, and they're very comprehensive. So what happens when BPD says, "Hey, we think we're ready in the area of use of force," we go in and we look at it and we spend months. You know, we do the investigative work, we look at the body worn camera footage, we look at the reports, and then we send it to our scientists who look at this stuff, all based on a methodology, and we make a decision in terms of, okay, if there are 15 paragraphs, have they complied? They need pretty much to have a 95% scoring rate in each paragraph. So if they get 95% in, let's say, all 16 paragraphs, they're then in what we call full and effective compliance. And you heard us talk a little bit about 1 year, 2 years. Once we find them in full and effective compliance, that's not the end of the game. Because if it's a 2-year sustainment period, which means they have to behave themselves and do this, they have to keep doing what they've been doing, which is right, for 2 years, or in some cases 1 year, that comes back before the court. And we look at it again, and we'll say to the judge, we've looked at their audits, we looked at their reports, we think that they are on track because they had a sustainment plan, they've stuck to it. So if it's use of force and they needed to do this like for 2 years, well, we'll recommend to the judge that he should let them out from under federal oversight. But the consent decree is designed so that we can let, or the judge can let each section out at different times. So there's not going to be one time the judge is going to look at it and say, okay, you guys are released. They will not be released until they have satisfied all 17 areas. And how long that's going to take, we don't know. But we're going to do 11 assessments this year. Well, let me go back for a second. There's 17 areas. We've already found them in full and effective in 5, which means there are 12 open. 1 we can't do this year because staffing are not ready. The other 11, we're going to do assessments. We're going to give the police department and the city an opportunity to show to us why they think they are in full and effective compliance. We have a methodology. We will do the same thing that I just explained to you. We will review it. And, you know, I'm hoping they are, but they don't get a pass. I mean, if they don't have that score that we require them to have, then guess what? They come back and we have to assess them again. So I hope that answers.
Oh, yeah, absolutely,
the question.
absolutely.
But I just want to also, just on top of that, I want to say that 38 paragraphs is a significant amount. And it's a big chunk of the consent decree. So I can tell you that we will not take our eye off of misconduct and discipline, even when they're in sustainment. We will be watching them critically self-assess, as I've said, but we're also going to be proving.
And that's a 2-year suspension.
It's 2 years.
It's almost like, let me use this analogy. If you play golf, you heard of muscle memory. You know, the idea is, you know, they've been trained, they're supposed to know what they're doing, and we may have found them to be in full and effective, but we want to see if they are still able to maintain that activity and that performance for 2 years after we found that they were obeying what they were supposed to. So that's kind of the way it works. Yes, sir.
Just for the general public, if you could identify the 5 areas that they're in full compliance.
Coded, transportation of persons in custody, officer wellness, school police, and what's the 5th?
First Amendment.
First Amendment, yeah, that's your area. Yeah, those are the 5. Yes, sir.
Are any of you on staff of BPD?
No.
No. Thanks for coming great distances for doing this, but who are your counterparts in Baltimore? Do we have a psychologist in charge in Baltimore?
Go ahead.
And first of all, I'm not sure I introduced myself when I first spoke. I'm Evan Shea. I'm one of the deputy monitors. I'm a lawyer. I'm at the same law firm as Mr. Thompson. I was just going to say, turn it over to Randy. Do you have a?
Yeah, let me just ask a quick question on that. When we're not in a position where there's an exact counterpart, but we're kind of like an extension of the judge.
Yeah.
And the judge is unique. So we're in a unique position of being able to say, we're with the judge, and the judge is going to figure out what's working and what isn't working. But are there people involved in Baltimore in the field? Yes. What we do when we come here is we work with those individuals. We try to make sure that they've got policies that they will follow. So are there psychologists? Yes, there's psychologists in the police department. There's a wellness program in the police department. But more broadly, there's a whole network of care that occurs. When I say the Baltimore mental health system, it is so massive that I couldn't even, you know, there's hundreds and hundreds of people involved in that, and hundreds of providers. So does that answer your question?
Well, not quite. Can you give us the name of the person in charge of behavioral psychological problems?
Krista Taylor is the woman that's the CEO for the Baltimore, it's called BHSB, it's Baltimore Behavioral Health Systems of Baltimore.
Kristen Taylor.
Krista Taylor.
Kristen.
Yeah.
Krista.
Taylor.
Krista.
And our role is to have an important role in sort of making sure the system works well. She interfaces between the state and the city and the providers, and she has a large staff and a lot of people that work with her.
And she's a psychologist.
No, she's a social worker.
Do we have a psychologist?
They also have psychologists there as well, yes.
Can you give us a name?
Of a particular psychologist?
Yes. Who's in charge?
She's in
You
charge.
may not
She's
know,
a
Randy,
social worker.
Hold on, let me explain something. Look, we are completely independent from the police department, the city of Baltimore, and the Department of Justice. We essentially, someone just said to you, we are an extension of the judge. We are his.
Okay, I get that.
Well, but I want you to make sure. I want to make sure you understand. That means that we don't deal with any of these parties. We evaluate what they do. We don't sit down with them and you know, I won't say conspire. That's not a good one. We don't sit down and try to work out some agreement with them. We look at their performance. We look at the data. You know, we will assess them. There'll be, you know, we may spend 6 months looking at a particular area like use of force or misconduct of discipline. We then make our own decision. They don't have any input. I mean, they give us the data, we look at it, we make sure it's accurate, and then we make a decision.
Okay.
But when you say counterpart, we don't have counterpart.
Okay. Well, thanks for coming great distances to help us with this.
Yes, sir. Oh, yes, sir.
Going back to just sustainability, one of the things that was very concerning early on really was around hiring practices, and there was some change that was made, and we've seen the positive impact, particularly with our having conversations with our officers that are on the street. They feel more empowered to have conversations with their authority where they did not prior to. However, I'm concerned in two places. What's the strategy to sustain positive hiring practices? And two, we also have the opposite of that. Because of those hiring practices, we also see issues of apathy with our officers, where we have officers not willing to act. So there have been an increase, and I'm not speaking towards the data, but just from a community lens, there have been an increase of issues where they may be seen as petty crimes, where officers are not willing to act. And are you hearing anything around that? And what is our plan to be able to address that? Sorry, two questions, two opposite ends.
Let me do this first, and then I'm gonna let the experts answer. Someone asked the question, I think it was the gentleman in the back, asked about influencers and community involvement. And let me tell you, one of the most important things that the community can do is you have to be the eyes for this city, okay? And you need to be the eyes for us. You know, there's 22 of us. You know, we can't possibly be every place, everywhere, every day, 24 hours a day. We need community members, when they see a police officer taking a nap, you know, when he or she should be working, you know, you don't have to go up to that person. I mean, you can do it from a block if you got decent eyes, or you can walk by, just write the number of the car down and the time that you saw it. Because that's one way that, you know, you can address that issue. Now, and that requires community involvement. And my view is, I live in the city. I've lived here 74 years, man. And I love this city, but I know I have an obligation to take some responsibility to make sure that things are being done. If I see something and don't report it, I don't have a right to complain. Okay, so I expect people, I don't mean everybody, because some people got other issues, but most of us, when you see something like that, you need to talk about it. Now, Ted, I'm gonna let you give a more direct answer to his question.
I'm gonna talk about the apathy issue. You know, I hear what you're saying about with the hiring. They get really good candidates who are doing a lot of work on their hiring process to make sure they vet those candidates and that the training that provides good officers. One of the concerns that I've had, we actually voiced it last week in court talking about it, and I also heard it come up in the ComStat meeting I attended, in that when we watch the video, we see that an officer did not take the action they should have taken when there was either probable cause for an arrest or at least reasonable articulable suspicion to investigate a crime or potential crime. That's pointed out in our reviews. And the judge is very cognizant of that. And he says, you know, we don't want to take it to a place where officers are afraid of acting, which is what we saw when the consent decree first started. And we saw officers didn't know what to do. And so what they would do then is nothing, because that was the safest way to get themselves out of trouble, keep people out of trouble. I think I'm really glad to hear what you said, is that you're seeing officers out there and you're seeing them more willing to talk with authority about what's going on and what's happening there, because that's where we want to go. And when we find those instances where officers are not doing what they're supposed to do, that's when we bring it up and we take it to the commanders and the command staff saying, you know, you got a problem here, issue here, and then we're gonna evaluate Hassan's area. Are they taking care of the misconduct? Are they issuing discipline when appropriate, or are they providing training when needed? Sometimes it's just because they're not sure. Youth was a big area for that. That's why we worked really hard with getting the supervisors to be more knowledgeable, and that's what we're still working on, to get them more knowledgeable so they can direct their officers as to what they need to do. Because some of that apathy may not be a lack of caring, maybe they're not quite sure yet. This is still fairly new. We started the training in 23, just finished it up. We have the policies only been in place for a year now. It takes time for a big ship to move somewhere and to change direction. So I'm hoping you're gonna see less of that, because we're gonna keep working with the supervisors to make sure they know how to direct their officers what to do, and we're gonna keep holding everyone accountable in our reviews to make sure that they're not doing what they're supposed to do, someone is aware of it, and now you gotta make sure that the commanders do what they're supposed to do and hold those people accountable.
So supervision is an area of the consent decree. At least a couple of us are involved in that area, and that's something that we're watching. It has a name, depolicing.
Yeah.
Has a name, and it's fact in a lot of cities.
And to answer the first part of your question on recruiting and hiring, that is also an area of the consent decree. There's a number of requirements requiring BPD to have a plan for recruiting officers and hiring them, and a whole bunch of requirements as to the standards they need to apply to do so. That will have its own sustainment plan, and there are processes built in, hopefully, to make it a self-correcting apparatus that continues well beyond that consent decree.
Appreciate the insight.
So we've run over.
Yeah. Take one more. Yes, sir.
Is there a way to restrain people who are out of control without sitting on their chest and causing cardiac arrest, or putting their knee on their back and breaking their spine, or suffocating them, or this has been a big problem here in town.
Well, that's one of my areas also, use of force, and that is one of the areas that we're working with right now. They have proper training for them to teach them how to control individuals without inhibiting breath or blood flow, making sure they put them in recovery positions after they get them into custody. You don't just sit there on top of a person, you make sure you get them back where they can recover. So yes, that is.
So the police have been instructed not to do that anymore.
Trained
Absolutely.
instructors.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Appreciate y'all. Thank you.